Welcome to Better Mental Health, a podcast for men looking to build a resource and community around destigmatizing men's mental health. I'm Blair.
And I'm Blake. And in this episode, Blair and I are going to discuss our own experiences with therapy, both what has worked for us and what hasn't worked. We'll talk about our experiences in attempting to find a therapist that fits our needs, as well as what it looks like to end a relationship with a therapist when it doesn't seem to be serving you or working for you.
As you can see or hear, we are without Jamie today, unfortunately. But Blake and I decided to do an episode with just the two of us to get into our own therapy journeys because they've been a
Yeah.
little bit different. Because Jamie's had his one therapist he's worked with, for however many years, and that might not be everybody's experience. Definitely not mine.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the very first things I wanted to talk about actually was the difficulty in finding a therapist that works for you. Yeah, I mean,
hmm
how many therapists have you worked with?
So I've really only worked with one professional therapist, but when I was working with him, he also had a men's group that he ran once a week. And so I did start joining that too. And so I'd meet with this group. It was about 7 or 8 guys. We'd meet once a week and kind of do like a roundtable discussion with this therapist. He kind of facilitated it.
Hmm.
So a little bit of like two different experiences, but kind of the same therapist who I was working with throughout.
Ooh, well, that's
But
maybe another thing we can talk about that I didn't actually think we might get to, but like the difference
yeah,
between therapy, individual therapy versus group therapy. I know that
hmm
Jamie, again, has done both. So he'll have to weigh in. We'll have to do another episode of this, but
for
yeah.
sure.
So the way that you've done it though is actually even more particularly interesting because you've done one-on-one therapy with the therapist and then also that same therapist in group. So I'm curious about the difference you experienced between those two.
Yeah. So I'll just quickly talk about like how I found this therapist because it was sort of I wasn't necessarily like actively looking for a therapist, but a book that we talked about on a previous episode, No More Mr. Nice Guy. Um, that book was pretty helpful for me in a number of different ways. Um, but in the book, it talks about how the author kind of created this community called, like, I think it was just No More Mr. Nice Guy groups.
Mm.
And I thought that sounded kind of interesting. Maybe there's one in my area. And so I Googled it and I found this therapist who was like a certified, part of the No More Mr. Nice Guy group. Obviously, he had his own certification and was working with a separate practice, but had this other focus that he had too. So I was like, well,
Mm.
that might be a pretty good fit if he's somebody who works with other quote unquote nice guys
Yeah.
like myself. And so I scheduled an appointment with him, and honestly, the first few one-on-one sessions with him were really, really great. He definitely connected with me on the whole nice guy thing. The thing that actually impressed me about him the most was I would have a session with him and then maybe not meet with him for a month or two, and I'd come back for another session and he would remember everything that we had talked
Yeah.
about. Maybe he's just a great note taker or he just had a great memory. But I was like, wow, you remember that. And so that made me feel like he, was invested and was really trying to help me.
Yeah. Well,
And
before we
the
get too
reason
far,
yeah.
but I was gonna say before we get too far into the experience, I was also actually curious what you might have been looking for, like typically there's like the initial consult call. So
hmm
you call and schedule, a little, it can be either, a video call or a phone call, typically a phone call. I don't know, these days it's probably more on the video side, but yeah, I know that when I'm doing that sort of consult call, I'm looking for something specific, but I'm curious, and maybe it has changed since you did that, but um, curious what you're looking for or what you were looking for when you initially hopped on that call, like what sorts of modalities you were hoping to like
hmm
work with. Did you have any sort of thing like that in your mind?
Yeah, I felt like I wasn't very good at setting boundaries. That was a big takeaway for me from the reading the book,
Mm.
was just being kind of that classic nice guy. And wanting to avoid conflict and not wanting to set any boundaries that I thought might create conflict. And so I just wanted some help there. At the time, I was also really struggling with going bald. I was
Oh yeah.
losing my hair. Whole long backstory behind that, the hair loss journey. But at
Mhm.
that point in my life, I had not shaved my head yet. So I was still losing my hair and I was really insecure about it, kind of depressed about it. And so I was like, well, there's a few issues that I think I need to work on. And so that was kind of the catalyst
Mhm.
for what made me say, you know what, I should probably reach out to this guy.
Yeah.
And it was just a happenstance that, you know, this guy was about 15, his office was like 15 minutes from where I lived. And because he was connected to that No More Mr. Nice Guy community, I was like, this might be a good fit.
Yeah. You already knew kind of the what you might be looking for because it
Mm-hmm.
was a part of that group at
Yeah.
least. I
Yep.
What surprised me there was you met in person then.
Yeah. This was pre 2020.
Yeah.
So none of the lockdowns or like virtual meetings weren't really that common at
Mhm.
that time, which is crazy now because everything we do now feels like it's virtual.
Yeah. Hence
Yeah,
this
exactly.
exchange. No, but that the reason it surprised me was because I mean, okay, so what was it last? No, it was Monday, like 2 days ago. I
Hmm.
had my last session with the therapist I've been working with for the last like
Yeah,
6 months or something.
yeah. I know we talked briefly on the phone about that, but I wanted to hear
Yeah.
how it
Oh
went.
man, I thought it was gonna be so awkward because the biggest reason was because I had never worked in person with somebody,
Hmm.
and it'd been kind of on my mind of like, all right, I really want to work in person with someone because I just am not able to drop in. It's been relayed to me by the therapists that I've worked with that like my kind of inability to drop into just the feelings that I'm experiencing and let alone actually, talking about them and explaining them and describing them. It was more just like I can't access them. And I think a
Hmm.
big portion of that inability to access those emotions was my being virtual with them. Um, it had been on my mind, and then I like went to a party this last weekend, and there was like a couple other therapists there, and anytime I've mentioned to other therapists, like, "Oh yeah, I've never worked with a therapist in person," the kind of the shock on their face is like,
Hmm.
"Wait, what? You never worked with in person with a therapist?" So
Yeah.
I think I was done seeing that, and I was done trying to explain, like, "Oh yeah, but I've done other things." So yeah, I messaged my therapist on Sunday. It was less than 24 hours before our scheduled meeting time, and I was like, "Hey, just so you're aware," I kind of explained it to him a few times during sessions. I was like, "I'm feeling like I need to be in person with somebody. It just kind of makes me feel a little bit more able to drop in." So I messaged him and he got back like, "Hey, just so you're aware, like it's less than 24 hours before our time, so I'm still going to charge you." Which there's always like a little pang of like, "What the fuck?"
Hmm.
But it's like, "Oh, no, that's
Yeah.
part of the cancellation policy, which you sign all the paperwork."
Yeah. It is still a business.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for
I
them.
know.
Yeah.
And then the
Hmm.
the part that comes to me is like, "Damn, I'm going to have to do that too."
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Because
figure out how
that's
to do
something
that.
I wanted to dive into a little bit. Because for those who don't know, Blair is in school to be a therapist. So,
Yeah.
you know, having the experience of going to therapy and then how that might translate into being a therapist for others.
Mm,
Do you think that you want to do most of your sessions when you start developing client base in person? Now that you've had this sort of like, I know you haven't yet done the in person
right.
experience as the patient, but what are your thoughts on that now that you've kind of done everything virtually?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like it's really dependent on the client because I think if the client
Mm,
I'm pretty good at reading like what might be coming up in the moment for a client, even over video. But there are certain things that this is another thing I was discussing with the therapists at this party. But like, if you're only seeing from chest to just above their head,
hmm.
they might have their hands off screen and be like kind of being, picking or
Twitching or
tapping their
yeah,
foot,
yeah.
something that you're just not picking up on
You
that you
miss
could
yeah, you
get
miss
asked about.
some cues. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So
It's just different. I mean, even, in my job, doing things
yeah.
virtually versus in person, it's just it's a different feeling. It's a different
I know.
vibe. It's a different experience. So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, to answer your question more specifically, I think I will have a better gauge for how I want to, have clients, work with clients once I start doing that, which is in the
Yeah.
fall. So in a few months, I'll start working with them. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so to get back to my canceling with my therapist, I was like, just so you're aware, like I'm doing this thing. I want to make sure that we talk through it. And he was like, basically, he said, I'm going to charge you anyways. So if you want to have like a last conversation, talk about what went well, what didn't, or that felt good. So the thing that made me feel like it might get super awkward was because it wasn't just that wasn't in person. That was a big portion of it, but I just also didn't feel like that connection. This is a kind of a
Mm-hmm.
constant thing,
Mm-hmm.
People who have been working with therapists for a long time, they will never let you, they'll always let you know that they love their therapist, that they, feel so seen by them, etc. And every time I hear that, I feel like a little drop in my stomach because I'm like, I've never experienced that. And this is not, again, I feel like I have to like stipulate it a little bit. I'm like, I'm not shitting on my therapists that I've worked with. They've been like excellent at what they do. It's just, it definitely is a connection thing. And
Mm-hmm.
you just have to keep trying and trying. And I think that was a big portion of what we wanted to talk about too, was like the
Yep.
difficulty in finding a therapist, and when it doesn't work out, to continue to try. I think you had mentioned something. I'll let you speak to what
Yeah.
you were trying to describe earlier.
Well, I think a lot of guys' experiences is either they've they don't want to do therapy at all because either they felt like opening up has backfired on them in the past, or it's maybe seen as like a weakness, or they just don't know how to go about doing it. I mean, let's be honest, the medical world in general can be, complicated, like working with your insurance and making sure you're finding somebody in network and in your area and all that. So it's complicated just to find somebody at all, let alone
Hmm.
somebody that you connect with. And yeah, I think what we kind of wanted to talk about is that is part of the process. Like, you may not find that person that you connect with, like you were talking about, right away. And the key is to not take that experience to just further validate those
Mm.
feelings that you maybe already had. Because maybe there's a guy who has thought about doing therapy for a long time, finally got to a breaking point, or just a point where he said, okay, I need to do this, and then reached out, went to meet with somebody, and it didn't go well at all. And then that just perpetuates the cycle of, well, I knew it. I knew a therapy wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I mean, I hate to use the comparison, but I guess it is kind of like dating. You may
Yeah.
not, connect with somebody the first time, but that doesn't mean that you should just stop looking, because we're all human beings, and, we all connect with some people a little easier than others. And so, yeah, I know. That's some advice that I'm trying to give myself too, because the therapist that I was seeing, although I thought he was really good and I did connect with him initially, one thing that did happen as we were in the men's group that he was facilitating, I had finally kind of like opened up about this insecurity about my hair loss. And then like 2 minutes later, he kind of like used it as a joke to the group.
I know.
And I was like, hey man, like,
Boy. Yeah.
this is that's not cool. And so that experience, and then kind of a just weird timing, like 2020
Hmm.
March rolled around and lockdowns happened. And so I kind of used that as an excuse to stop seeing, because he started doing virtual meetings and stuff. And I kind of used that as an excuse to stop seeing him. But part of it
Yeah.
was because I had that negative experience where I was like, wow, okay, I did open up about something and it was kind of used against me. But what I've
Yeah. Yeah.
learned from that experience is that even though that was a little bit, it felt like a little bit of a dig, a little bit like of a gut punch, the more that I've opened up about that insecurity, the more I've like talked about it and been open about it, I have definitely felt better about it. And
Hmm.
that has been a huge weight off my chest. So that bad experience aside, the greater lesson learned for me was that it has overall been a beneficial experience to learn how to be more open about some of these things that I was struggling with, because it truly has helped me. Like, yes, on one hand, it leaves you vulnerable, opening up to a partner, a therapist, a family member. I hear stories, I read comments all the time. Like, I opened up about something and it was used against me, later on in an argument or something like that.
I still don't understand that, but I
If
know
it
I
happens,
have a hard.
that tells you a couple things, right? Maybe that person is somebody you don't want in your life, or somebody you need to set
Yeah,
more boundaries with. But two, that shouldn't hold you back from addressing these things, because it's so
sharing
critically
your full
important.
self.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, my uncle, I remember, gave me an analogy that I really liked, where like if you got a sports injury, like you injured your elbow or your leg, like you wouldn't think twice about going to get it like a rehabbed, or get medical treatment for it. So
unless you're a
why
Russian
wouldn't you do the
scientist,
same
but
thing for your that's a whole nother.
yeah,
But why wouldn't you do the same thing for your mind? Like if you're
yeah,
struggling with something mentally, it's not a weakness, it's just something that you can
that is.
potentially address. Yeah, that is, and that you could that.
Yeah, but I think that's the other. Yeah, the difficulty in just sitting with things that are the discomfort of like, oh, okay, so I know that I have this thing that I've been dealing with mentally, but and I've made no progress on it. But that's not a indicative of me being less than or any broken in some capacity and needing fixing. I think that's another misnomer with therapy in general, especially with men. It's like, oh, if I go to a therapist, that means I'm broken and I need fixing. When
Hmm.
in reality, it's like it's just we're all dealing with really difficult things because life is not just like sunshine and rainbows for everybody.
Yeah.
Um, so it's we all need help. But
Yeah.
we're both on you and I both now are on this journey of finding a new therapist. I'm curious where you're at and what's the latest.
Yeah, so I actually do want to document my experience looking for a new therapist. And I have really only gotten so far as looking at my insurance online and finding companies that are in my network,
Mm,
or people that are in my network, therapists that are in my network. So I did reach out to one, um, and they actually just responded to me. So I'll be connecting back with them to set a time and
nice.
see how it goes. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I will say the the thing that I want to bring in is also I think I started to talk about it a little bit, but like I don't think that I had no, I don't think I know that I had no idea what like modalities, what types of things to look for when I was initially looking for a therapist. Actually, the
Hmm.
first therapist that I had, I didn't even look for. It was I was in couples therapy. My partner at the time, she had a therapist that she was working with, and she was like, "Do you mind if we like use this person and do couples therapy together?" I was like, "Sure." I've always been a proponent of therapy. It just took me a long time to get into it
Yeah.
for whatever reason. A lot of that is the money side of things. And so that was the way that I initially got a therapist. And then I started working with him individually too. So he was individually working with both of us and then as a couple as well. But, anyways, it was going through my therapy program that I'm in currently that has kind of, learning about the different modalities, the different types of approaches that has kind of given me a more nuanced view of like what I actually want in a therapist. I was able to kind of describe that to my therapist as in our last session. I really do feel like the like psychodynamic approach or the psychoanalytic approach is something that I think is a really good introduction for people who are getting into men specifically are getting into therapy. Maybe not even men, I think just people in general. Um, and that's the kind of in layman's terms, it's kind of the Freudian, Jungian type of, you're on the analytic, you have an analyst who's kind of just letting you free form your thoughts and interrupting with like, you can see how that translates to this thing in your past or so on and so forth. I definitely was thinking that I didn't want that sort of therapy when I initially was looking for one outside of my first one. I wanted to I knew that I was not able to access like my body very well like,
Mm.
and figure out what it was that it was teaching me. I know I spend most of my life, and I think a majority of us do, especially men, like from the neck up. Like we're not, I don't know what I feel. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. We've been
Yeah.
watching couples therapy on Showtime. Do you watch that?
Hmm. I haven't watched it yet.
Ooh.
You told me to,
Okay,
but I
that'll
haven't
be
yet.
I haven't, yeah, that'll be a whole episode, I'm sure, on like the people inside of that. But what
Hmm.
I'm noticing is a big portion of the males in the relationship not able to access their feelings and like what, okay, so like sit with that, like explain to me what you're feeling. And then they go into like this, well, I think about this. It's like, okay, you're thinking, what are you feeling? So anyways, when I was initially looking for a therapist, I was like, I want something that's like body focused, somatic focused. And so I found a therapist, but then that was over video, so it was like I couldn't do that with
Yeah, that
someone over video.
that doesn't seem like it would translate well over
No,
video.
not very
Yeah.
conducive. But yeah, so now I've flipped a little bit backwards and wanting the psychoanalytic approach and to work with someone who's just a little bit more focused on letting me free associate thoughts and figure out what things might come up during a session. But
Hmm.
not only that, I am also interested in someone who can facilitate ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So, which is super expensive, so I don't know if I'll actually do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's another
So,
thing that I was talking about with the person. Well, this was not a therapist at this party, but it was someone on the client side, and he talked about intramuscular ketamine-assisted therapy versus a lozenge or a powder or a nasal spray.
hmm.
And it was interesting because I have experience with my own therapeutic use of ketamine, and it was not intramuscular. So the things that this person was describing was like when it's intramuscular, it's keeps you in that state that is very therapeutically helpful, where you can kind of rise above the difficult emotions and you're able to describe them without like being overly enveloped by them. Versus the way that I was doing it, get to that space that he was describing, and then come out of it, and then have to re-up or whatever to get back to that space. So, anyways,
Mm.
something that I was interested in exploring more of.
So yeah, go into that a little bit more because I'm not sure I fully understand. So
Sure.
basically it allows you to, is it allowing you to feel more what's happening in your body without, but being able to kind of apply your normal like thinking to it? Is that how you would describe it, or am I way
With the
off?
ketamine assisted,
Yeah.
yeah, the way that I've experienced ketamine has been, yeah, it's it is a disassociative, so you are removed from
Hmm.
your body in a sense. So it's less to like get in touch with your body and more of a get out of your head and to kind of separate from the difficult emotions. So you might like if you're experiencing a or I guess there's no like re-experiencing it, but if you're remembering a traumatic event from your childhood, there could be a lot of somatic, like, oh my gosh, and like difficult emotions that are coming up. But if you are on a disassociative, like ketamine or something similar to that, also, all of this, let's just stipulate it. We're not experts. Do not try any drugs at home. Find a facilitator. Do it the legal way.
Hmm.
Yeah, all the
Yes.
legalese that we need to say.
100%. Yep.
Yeah, but yeah, you're able to separate from them and just kind of not get fully overwhelmed by the feelings that are, kind of locked away in your autonomic nervous system.
So I think I've heard that this is used quite a bit for veterans, combat
Yeah.
veterans, which totally makes sense because if it allows you to disassociate a little bit from those very traumatic experiences that somebody may have had, but it allows you to process them and work through them. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. The other one that's popular with PTSD is MDMA, which is another, much different experience, but similar in that you do not get overwhelmed. You can just I've seen videos of, veterans just describing horrors that they've seen on the
Hmm.
battlefield, but they're like moving through it with ease, not necessarily not dropping into those feelings, but able to finally like access them without them being overwhelming and then trying to push them down or to the side without addressing them. So
Mm.
super
Yeah.
helpful.
Hmm.
And I'm actually taking I might have mentioned that I'm taking a psychedelic assisted psychotherapy class in the fall. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I can also describe my own experience if I end up doing some ketamine-assisted psychotherapy with someone. But
Yeah.
so those are the things that I'm looking for. Like I want to dive into my past. I want to figure out the types of things that are still unaddressed, still not haven't made a lot of motion on or movement on. But I'm curious, yeah, if you have things that you're wanting to spend more time on, or if there are modalities or anything that you're literally searching for.
Mm. For me, like the reason that I kind of want to get back into therapy is like I do still have I'm definitely still fighting with like, you know, the childhood insecurities that like carried on through adulthood. Like I definitely feel like I've come a long way, but I still find those things just like cropping back up here and there. I you know I struggle to I struggle with imposter syndrome a lot,
Mm.
and my own like self-worth. That's something that has always been a challenge for me. Just feeling like, well, why would anyone care? Like what you know what do I bring to the world? Um, and again, I think I've come a long way from where I used to be, but definitely it crops up, and I feel like it
Can I
just sort of
ask?
like cripples me from getting things
Mm,
done and yeah, doing what I should be doing.
yeah, I wanted to ask, is it ever noticeable, or is it noticeable when it crops up the most? Like, is it in work, in relationship, in family dynamics?
Mostly in work, and then trying to find like a purpose outside of work, because I
Mm,
don't want to just have my work be like my job be like what defines me as a person.
yeah.
That's kind of something I've felt for a long time. As I've been at one company for a long time, and I feel like if I ever left, I would be like kind of lost because I've
Yeah.
started to identify with like that role and that job. And so I've been working on obviously doing things like this, working on another channel that I have where I talk about specifically more about hair loss and like, you know, struggling through that as like a, you know, early 20s, which I think a lot of men can relate to. Wanted to start like sharing that experience and like
Check out Bald Man Cave.
destigmatizing some of that so that other men feel more comfortable like realizing they're not alone in that experience. And but sometimes the little voices crop in saying like, well, you're not the right person to deliver that message. Like it would be better coming from somebody else. So those things I struggle with quite a bit. And
Mm,
I know that it's like all the stuff that's like cropping up from those same feelings I had like through childhood and adolescence.
yeah.
Because I remember having those thoughts, similar thoughts, quite a bit.
Right.
So I want to, you know, start to face that. Because again, one thing I've definitely learned about talking more openly about like how much going bald like impacted my confidence, and I was very insecure about it. Like the more open I've been about it, the better I felt about it. So
Yeah.
like I want to apply that to other areas of my life, but I think I need some help doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally get that. The thing that's coming to mind too is in the difficulty in either switching to a new therapist or starting with a new therapist altogether. The thing that came up in my last session with my therapist when I was telling him I wanted to start with someone else was he mentioned it to me too. He's like, there is this pull in you to try and give all of your background information to that
Hmm.
therapist so that like, okay, so then we're now you understand me a little bit. And so like, let's work from this spot. We spent several sessions with me just like, all right, here's family stuff. I grew up in Christian Science. Do with that what you will, like just trying to give him all the information I could. And I think that
So you're trying to like
there's
throw in all these like here's all the variables that you need to consider when
Yeah. And
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that may be another thing that men think about when they are about to start with a therapist. They're like, okay, where do I begin? There's just so many things that I need to get through, or that I feel like I need to talk to a therapist about, or to make them aware of. Like, where do I even begin? I know this is, maybe I'll just speak from my own experience, but I have also talked to other men who said similar things. But I think, yeah, the next time I start with a therapist, I'm not going to try and just divulge all the information that I can. Because I think that was another thing that started to become like, all right, now that I'm noticing I'm not feeling a great connection with this therapist, well, I've been working with them for 6 months. If I start with someone new, I'm going to have to tell them all of the same stuff, and not, and be in the same spot in another 6 months. So it's like,
Mm.
it's kind of this pushing a rock up a hill.
A little bit of the sunk cost fallacy where maybe you end up sticking with a therapist for longer than you should because you're like, well, I've already spent so many hours and I'm not feeling connected, but they know all this stuff about me already. So I should just like try to stick with it, even though it's not really working.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's that's a challenge. And I think that's where you really have to, do that inner work to be like, you know what, this person is just not connecting with me on the level that I want them to.
Yeah, which is
But
so hard to admit.
I wanted to ask you kind of in that same vein. So like one thing for somebody who's never done therapy before, I think it's probably important to know like, one session
Yeah.
isn't gonna fix everything and it's not gonna like you're not gonna necessarily be, crying for 45 minutes because you've just spilled your guts on everything that you've ever stressed about.
Hmm.
It might be just a, you know, kind of a getting to know you type of session, right? Like,
Yeah.
and some of it's a little bit surface level. You're not necessarily going to go super deep right away, right? Is
Right.
that your experience?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. When you said that, oh, you're not necessarily gonna cry. I think I've talked about this in previous episodes, but I'm like, I have cried, and not like sobbed crying, but I've like shed tears and had like difficulty, continuing to talk once in therapy.
Hmm.
And so that's, yeah, just so difficult to move through things. And yeah, it could be, it could be very slow going. And I think that that is also dependent on, a person's ability to fully show themselves and drop in. And I think that's something that I've struggled with. I've been like, here's all of this information that you have of me, that is my like identity. And when in reality it's like, but you're not like, where are you right now? Who are you, like,
Yeah.
in this moment? Like, what are we trying to get through? I think that's another thing that I struggle with, is so many things happen in a week. It sounds ridiculous, but like, so many things happen in a week that I just, I'm like, should I talk about the things that just happened in this week, or should I go back to like the thing that happened in childhood? Like, so I constantly struggle with that, and I try to just sit with what feels right in the moment. But I'm forgetting what you asked specifically, but I'm hoping I answered it.
No, I asked like for your first session, if somebody's
No.
never gone to therapy before and they're like, well, what does the first session look like? Like
Yeah.
it's not necessarily going to be anything overly dramatic one way or the other. Like you you're not necessarily going to go like super deep on something. You're not going to have like an emotional breakdown. I mean, you might,
You very well could. That's the thing. Like,
but for
if you're open to
yeah,
it.
but I don't think you should go in with the expectation like specifically this is what's going to happen because
Hmm.
it could be very different for everybody.
Yeah.
But I think it's good to know that it could take multiple sessions to start getting to a point where you feel like you're digging into what your root issues are.
Yeah. It reminds me of, I was talking to someone recently, and I've been trying to help them find a therapist, in a very roundabout way. They're very not open to it. But they mentioned that they looked up their insurance, and they're like, oh yeah, so I have like 6 free sessions with a therapist that I'll make use of. And I was like, oh, okay. So like, how much is it after that? Trying to gauge their interests in moving past those 6 sessions. And when I followed up with like, oh yeah, so how much is it after that? They're like, oh, well, I probably won't do it after that. And I'm like, you think everything that you've experienced in your life will be like healed in
Cured.
6 sessions? Like,
Very
no,
optimistic.
yeah, that is not how it works. But yeah, that came to mind when you mentioned that.
I wanted to ask you, what would you say to somebody who's like been thinking about therapy, but maybe they feel like their issues aren't important enough
Mm.
to address with like a therapist? Because that was
Oh,
something I struggled with for a really long time, was like, the things I'm worried about, like, they're not that important. Like, there's much bigger issues in the world. There are people who are combat veterans who've seen like real legitimate trauma, nothing unlike I could imagine. So like, what am I doing? Like, why am I
right.
really, my little issues about my insecurities, like, who cares?
Yeah. The thing that comes to mind that was super impactful to me when I was going through like probably the most depressive time of my life was I read Viktor Frankl's Man's
Man's
Search for
Search for
Meaning.
Meaning.
You read that, right? And I'm going to butcher the quote. Amazing book, by
That's
the
all
way.
right.
This is
Yeah.
a psychologist, I believe, who was in Auschwitz
Hmm.
and witnessed some of the history's worst
Yeah.
atrocities to humans.
Yeah.
And the one line that I'm going to butcher terribly, but that came to me, or that was really impactful for me, was a person's suffering acts as a gas. It fills the encasement that it is within. So
Hmm.
no matter the size of the suffering, it still feels as significant as big T trauma versus little T
Yeah.
trauma. And also that's another, yeah, so that was one thing. And then also I took a trauma class last semester. Trauma is so much more prolific, I think, than we give it credit for. Trauma, when you hear the word, you're most likely thinking capital T, big T trauma, combat, you know, something happened in your childhood with, being inappropriately touched or something huge like that.
Yeah.
What I think we get away from so quickly is the proliferation of like little T trauma, which I had an issue with in this class. My instructor said something to the effect of we were learning about complex trauma, which is a pretty newish term that is kind of filtering into the world, but maybe it's not that new. I don't know. Someone's going to correct me on that, but that's fine. But complex trauma, as my instructor was describing it, I remember specifically she was like, so anytime you are, let me try and get it right. Anytime you are, what's like cast aside, what's the word I'm looking for there?
Pushed away.
No, I'm going to cut all this, but um when you're like
Cast
you're not
dismissed.
dismissed or fuck, this is going to bother me. When you're cast
Disregarded.
aside, disregarded or dismissed. Yeah. Yeah. So complex trauma,
Do
as
you want
my
to run
instructor
that?
was, yeah.
Sorry. You want to run
No,
that
it's fine.
sentence again?
Yeah. So complex trauma, as my instructor was describing it, was anytime that you are dismissed or your feelings are disregarded, anytime that is a small T trauma. And anytime you are submitted to that over a significant amount of time, that can cause just incredible issues in your everyday life.
Hmm.
And I remember when she mentioned that in class, I felt myself, this is where I'm a little bit more in touch with my somatic experience. I felt hardly, I mean, I scoffed. So it's
Okay.
not like hard to miss, but I was like, hold on. So isn't that anyone? Like who has gone through life being like constantly validated? That was the word I was looking for, by the way.
Mm.
Invalidation. So if you're constantly invalidated or disregarded or your feelings dismissed, like, yeah, that's a small T trauma. But I had this thought of like, how can anybody go through life not being invalidated or going through their life completely validated, like creating this secure relationship or attachment style with, caretakers or your family
Hmm.
of origin. It was unfathomable to me. I was like, this, it feels like we're casting the net a little too wide.
Mm,
But I think that's honestly how we have to look at it, because I think life isn't like, as I said before, is not sunshine and rainbows for everybody, and suffering fills the space that like a gas. So I think
yeah.
just to look at it that way, then it starts to become like, all right, everybody should be in therapy. Everybody has things that they've worked through or need to work through, and that's not a sign of something being broken, and the things we mentioned before. But I think that
Yeah.
was partially what you were talking about.
Yeah. And I mean, to that point, I think for probably a lot of men, they wouldn't even like consider probably therapy probably never even like occurred to them as like something to do, despite all of us having those experiences, even if it is something like that, where maybe you dismiss it as like, that happens to everybody.
Yeah.
But
It's
being
invalidating your own
invalid,
experience.
it is.
Yeah.
And remembering that we all have something to bring. We all have value to bring. And just because you feel like your problems are not as big as somebody else's, and then you're just playing the comparison game, which you can do
Yeah.
with anything. There's always somebody who, if you want to be the smartest person, there's always someone smarter. There's always someone stronger.
Hmm.
You know, but your experiences or traumas or insecurities or things that you just want to work through doesn't mean it's like taking away from other people, or that other people's experiences or other situations aren't important. Multiple things can be true at the same time, right?
Yeah. I feel like, I don't know if that's just like a thing happening in the world now, but like nuance is being lost.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, it is.
it's pretty wild. But
I
yeah,
know a
that's
lot
a
of
really good
black and
point.
white thinking going on right now, for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah. Yeah, we've lost the nuance that really permeates everything, because not every situation is black and white, and not every person, you can't just read them surface level and know exactly who they are, because we all have
Yeah.
our own histories and childhoods and things that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And this is only top of mind because I'm reading it for my current class, research methods. But I know you've talked about like, I want to hear more about what you guys are
Yeah,
learning in your
I
courses.
do.
So I'll throw this one too. But I was reading like how to become an anti-oppressive researcher. So essentially, what it was describing was how knowledge is curated, and it's usually from a researcher, researched, outsider, insider type of relationship dynamic that is pushing even data. We use it, we see it as like this. Okay, it's factual, and it's not just, it's not subjective, it's objective, and that's like the pinnacle of data versus like, what is the data that we're getting or looking for, and the reasoning behind it, and like the
Hmm.
knowledge that we're creating based on that data. And kind of, so the yeah, all of this to say, like, I think we're very interested in an objective reality when that's just kind of not ever going to be the case.
Yeah, for sure.
Even for your own.
Nope,
Something
never will be.
that I've also had a difficult time with, I've in my own experiences, like in my relationships, is like, I I'll do something or say something, and it's still hard for me to be in the mind space of like, the thing that I'm doing is not making someone feel a certain way. Like, I can't get out of that headspace of like, the thing that I'm doing, it's making them feel that way. But what it
Hmm.
truly is like, no, they have their own subjective experience of your action, and not necessarily, you're not making them feel that way. You're just doing a thing that they are reacting to. And
Yeah, I relate to that
right?
so much.
Tell
Yeah,
me
that's
more.
a hard thing to work past. It's like, no, my action is what caused this.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, that other person is just having their own reaction to that. It's not anything to do with you necessarily.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know that's like my deep rooted, conflict avoidance issues of like, if I say the wrong thing, I'm gonna upset this person, or they're gonna be angry with me.
Hmm.
I did want to ask you, so I've seen this comment come up a
Mm.
lot in regards to therapy. Basically, it's like, why would you go see a therapist? Because anyone who thinks their therapist cares about them is the same type of person that thinks a stripper likes them. Like,
Uh,
yeah, it's basically saying like, well, you paid this person, and so they're just pretending to like you. They're pretending to care about you.
wow.
And I've seen this comment multiple times on social media, and I have my own thoughts on it. But do you have any um, initial reactions to that comment?
Yeah, the first one is, so what, how does money exchange remove care?
That's a
I
great way
don't
to put it.
necessarily under.
Yeah, I think exactly. Yeah, I mean, it, it it's not that you're paying a therapist to be like your friend and to like care about you. No, you're paying them for a service that is intended to help you process through something that you're working on. I mean,
Yeah.
that the comparison doesn't make sense to me in that
Mm-mm.
way. And I think it's just an excuse um, to not want to pursue therapy.
Yeah.
Be like, well, it's just a way to like dismiss it, basically.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Hmm.
100%. Yeah, and I think it's, yeah, the comparison is definitely just weird on its surface. um, but yeah, I because I can't imagine like working with, maybe people need to see therapists in like the real world more often, and see that like they are most of the time extremely caring people who pursued this because they want to help people. Like, no one's doing
Yeah,
it like, oh, I really just want to make money. I mean, I don't know that I know of
yeah. You know what
anybody in my,
lucrative business I want to go into?
yeah,
Therapy.
yeah, and then there are some though. I think that there is some,
Sure, but
validity
it's
to.
not the like front of mind thing. If you're just purely worried about making money, you're not thinking I'm going to be a therapist.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
you're going to go into finance or something like that.
exactly.
Yeah, and like that's the interesting thing too is like I bet there are lots of therapists who do care about their clients too.
I would say the vast majority of therapists go into it because they care about the people that
Yeah.
they're working with.
Mhm. Because you have to have some, I'm sure you can speak to this as somebody who is, in school to do this as a career. You have to have some level of empathy for others and want to like help others in this way.
Yeah.
So I think inherently, therapists are probably more empathetic individuals and caring individuals
Yeah, I think the
to even want
opposite
to pursue
of.
that career. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing that's coming to mind is like the opposite almost is being taught through my course work. It's like how to make sure that you don't care so much that it
Hmm.
burns you the fuck out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the other class. So I'm in research methods, but I'm also in intro to community mental health. And yeah, that is one area that I didn't know that I had an interest in it, but as I learn more, I'm like, we need to help people way more. I'm in San Francisco, so I'm literally walk by unhoused homeless people every day. Sometimes, in psychosis,
Yeah.
speaking and to, no one who's there. So yeah, the one of the very first things, I can share it with you if you'd like, and I can put it in the comments or whatever as well, the description. But there's this NPR series. We only got assigned the first one, first episode of this series, but it's basically on these lost patients and how, they get churned out through the system. And the system, the thing that stuck with me from this, that I really just wanted to paint a picture of, or that just laid it out so well to me, was like, the system as it is right now for people in dire need, the way it's described is like it's a house that an architect designed each room separately. There are no hallways, there are no staircases, and when an architect of a specific room is asked, like, oh, so why didn't you, you know, connect it with a hallway to this other room? They're like, well, that wasn't my job.
Mm.
So we have all these separate rooms and that people just can't work their way through. And so my thought went to like, how is it so hard to create a damn house that's functional?
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe that's the thing that I work towards in the future, but I don't know. That was neither here nor there, but that was all to say therapists care and they're not doing it just for your money.
Well, and knowing you and Jamie, who is not here on this episode today, but who's also in school to be a therapist, two of you are two of the most empathetic, caring individuals that I know. And again, wouldn't think that you would pursue a career like this if it wasn't for that inherent nature that you have. So
Most of the
again, like
people I know are in debt because of they're becoming a therapist.
Yeah, it's not cheap.
Yeah, not doing
Yeah,
well.
you got to go to yeah. It's not like you can just anybody can just tomorrow wake up and be like, you know what, I'm going to be a therapist. It just
yeah.
There's a lot of work that goes in behind it. I know from watching the two of you guys. So yeah, I think if that's if you're listening to this and that's been a thought that you've had, again, I don't think the comparison applies. You're working with somebody who is a professional in their field, who probably is caring and wants to help. Now, is it going to be the perfect match for you? That's the question. And that's where it doesn't always initially work out, and why sometimes it does take some work to find somebody who's a good match for you. And that's probably why, I would guess, at least one factor as to why therapy sometimes maybe gets that reputation and why comments like that pop up. Because somebody had a bad experience in therapy and decided that that was just how it is universally, right?
Yeah.
And decided to spread that message around.
There was a podcast, I don't think it's running anymore, but for a while called like Bad Therapy. And it was people coming on to share experiences of therapists just being really bad. And I think that, and then there were, a couple of therapists who were describing what could have gone differently and how they could have approached it differently. But yeah, I think there's going to be, you might have bad experiences, but that doesn't necessarily mean that therapy as a whole is just this, innate, terrible occupation. But I think the other thing that I've heard, and maybe this is only anecdotal and not necessarily a consistent thing in comments or whatnot, but I've talked to people who, and I've experienced this myself, where I'm like, what is the point of the feeling of like getting into the emotions? Like, what is that actually helping me with? Like, I've had people I've talked to use the word dwell on as a way of like seeing that there is not a purpose for therapy. It's like, what's the purpose of dwelling on the past when I could just keep moving forward?
Got it. So they basically, their criticism is like, what good is me like revisiting this emotion or this experience?
Exactly.
Like, how is that gonna benefit me? That's just meaning, like you said, I'm dwelling on it and like not moving on from it. Is that basically what they're thinking?
Yeah. Because like if I can just shove that down and push it to the side, then it's over there and I can keep moving forward and not have to pay attention to it. And it's like, the more that I'm in this, go ahead.
It reminds me of that John Mulaney bit, the comedian, where he's like, I think he's like Irish Catholic or something. And he's like, and so what that means is that I hold all my emotions here, and then one day I'll die.
Yeah. That's just like what people get used to,
Yeah, just like this power through, like, I'm just gonna move. I'm gonna bury it deep, and I'm gonna move on.
Yeah, and that, I feel like that's just like such a closed vision of like what you could be, and like you close your heart that way, and then you're not open to receiving other ideas, other signs of life, the ways of being, and then you're just so stuck in the things that you are trained to.
Yeah, if I can bring up the hair loss thing again. I mean, so I was like, what, 22, 23, losing my hair very rapidly. It was like I was like going completely bald, and all my confidence was just like shot. And I would just spiral on this. Like I would just be in circles in my head, um, like I'm gonna be like alone forever because nobody's gonna find me attractive because I'm losing my hair, and like if you just keep all that stuff inside, what I've learned is that it just spirals deeper and deeper, and like you start telling yourself even worse things. Like some of the things I would like say about myself, I'm like, wow, like it was that's bad. Like the things you would never say to anybody, not your worst enemy.
Yeah.
Those things that I would tell myself, and then like again, my experience finally being like more open about that, and like obviously, I've embraced it now, but like talking about it more openly as an insecurity, just like it feels like a weight off your chest, like almost literally. I was going to say
Hmm.
literally, but I know that it's not literally. And again, despite having like one experience where like, yeah, it left me vulnerable and then it kind of backfired on me. But the overall experience of being more open about it, like sharing it, like, yeah, it's, been hard sometimes, but the amount of relief I've felt has been, indescribable.
Yeah.
So,
That's
yeah, go
that's
ahead.
amazing. No, that's amazing to hear, and it's so true. And I think that's the mis. I don't know if I'm using this right, but the misnomer of like, oh, if I push something to the side, if I compartmentalize, if I push it down, it's gone. It's not there. It's like that's not how it is, though. It'll come up in ways that you don't even realize. Like you'll be quick to anger and start yelling at your partner for something that you're like, wait, hold on. I just like asked if you wanted to go somewhere specific,
Yeah,
and you have no idea that like, oh, this thing that you pushed to the side is actually like just completely running things in a different way that you didn't realize.
totally.
Or
Yeah.
you're feeding this like inner, what do you call it, the inner critic more ammunition without it getting addressed. It's using that as like as a it's just feeding off of that, and then that inner
Yeah.
critic comes back harder and stronger, and then you're just giving into it. I don't know if
Yeah.
any of that made sense, but
It totally makes sense. And I think that's where, you and I were kind of talking about this the other day on the phone, but like that's where like this stuff does take courage. Cause like
yeah,
to face some of these things that you don't want to face, that you don't want to address, that like maybe on the surface level, are an issue, but you're scared to go a little bit deeper to like figure out what the root cause is. Like it's not easy to do. And that does take a lot of courage to do. And I think like therapy for whatever reason has been like, got this reputation of being like, oh, it's like a
weak.
emotional cry fest. Yeah, yeah, you're weak if you have to go to therapy. It's like, no, this takes a lot of guts
Yeah,
actually to
yeah.
like face the
Vulnerability
stuff.
is hard.
And you know what? It might just help you to show up better in your own life, show up better for your friends and family, other people you care about. So it's important. Your mental health is important,
Yeah,
and
it
it
very much is.
yeah,
I think that's
and
a
it shouldn't be pushed to the side.
yeah. I think that's maybe a great spot to end it.
And yeah,
Your mental
I
health is
agree.
important.
I
Yeah.
went
Well,
one too far.
yeah, it's okay. I think people will resonate no matter what. But this is gonna be, I'd love to have this conversation with Jamie once he's back. So
Yeah,
we'll say this is where we'll leave it for now, and more to come on the benefits of therapy, how to find a therapist and leave a therapist, etc. So
yeah.
for now,
And
thank you for tuning in.
if you're still here and have your own experience with therapy or questions about therapy that you want to ask us, feel free to drop a comment or reach out to us. So, with that, I think, yeah, we'll leave it and we'll see you on the next one.
See ya.